How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday, Yom Revi'i. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Wednesday? Chol HaMoed, Pesach, intermediate days of Passover. Yehud in South Carolina, Joe in the Inland Empire, Billum in Missouri, Melissa in Great Neck, Bella in Florida, Shandora in the Bronx, Guy in Ohio, Lorraine in Texas, Lucy in Minnesota, Nancy, North Carolina, Bella in Texas, Sharon in New Jersey, Aoife in Florida, Chaim in Florida, Ella in Southern California, Norm in San Clemente. Welcome, everybody. Chaim, glad you're here. Chaim emailed me and said, Sal, you should remind us about the Omer. So in fact, it is the third day of the Omer. We're counting the days, 7 weeks, between the second night of Passover and the holiday of Shavuos, in which the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. And this is a period of introspection, making a cheshbon, right? Making an accounting of the self as we count these days. So today is the third day of the Omer. We count it at night immediately after the evening prayers. So last night we counted that today's the third day of the Omer. And each week we reflect all week on one of the 7 attributes, the lower attributes of God, known as the sefirot, right? So we're counting the Omer and it's like counting sefirot. So the sefiros are the attributes of God. This gets a little bit mystical, Kabbalistic. The upper attributes are Chochmah, Bina, and Da'as. Above them, there's a supernal aspect, Keser, the crown. But generally speaking, the upper attributes are Chochmah, Bina, and Da'as, right? So the wisdom of God, the understanding of God, the Da'as, the knowledge or the integration of wisdom and understanding. And so we have obviously an infinitesimally, lesser reflection of the holy attributes, but we are endowed with wisdom and understanding and knowledge. Then there's the lower midos, and that's what we're really working on here. We're always trying to make, through Torah study, we're always trying to increase our wisdom, our understanding, and knowledge. But right now, we're working on our personal attributes, our midos. And so that would be Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, and then Netzach, Chod, Yesod, and Malchus. So what are these? So Chesed is loving kindness, and we'll spend this first week reflecting on Chesed. Are we being kind? In what ways can we improve our attribute of kindness? And then each day, we sort of look through that one attribute, Chesed, through the prism of all the other attributes. Therefore, the first day was the Chesed of Chesed. The second day is the Gevura of Chesed. So Gevura is restraint, judgment. That these are kind of these opposing forces, kind of like the right arm is Chesed, loving kindness, and the left arm is Gevura, restraint, judgment. Right? You have to temper your kindness with good judgment. It's funny that we mentioned that today. I was interviewed on a radio show earlier, and this came up, and there was this idea about how so many people, look, in these anti-Israel protests, I think a lot of these people are just Jew haters, Israel haters. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that, no, they're not anti-Semites, but they are really concerned, right, about the plight of the enemy. There are innocent people dying. It is terrible. Why is it happening? Because there's a horrific leadership in Gaza called Hamas, which is an absolute terrorist, death-addicted, death cult that is sacrificing its people, by essentially shooting at you and holding their baby as their shield and shooting at your family. Well, you're not going to let them kill your family, so you're going to shoot back. And since they're using their baby as a shield, okay, like unavoidably, there's going to be an innocent who is killed. But the reason for that is that this person is shooting at your family. Well, likewise, I mean, what happens is people, and this is an old saying, sometimes gets attributed to, to Chinese sages, but it's actually from Reish Lakish, the very familiar Reish Lakish, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, who said that if you show mercy in a situation where you should not have pity, then you will end up not having pity in a situation where you should have mercy. And an easier way to understand that in English is that if you are kind to the cruel, you will end up being cruel to the kind, right? So there are certain behaviors that we don't coddle and that we don't allow, and that there have to be consequences so that people learn, and so that this danger, gets treated properly in society. Right, so this idea comes from balancing gevura and chesed. You have to have a balance of loving kindness and judgment. Then the third day, the third attribute is Tiferet. Tiferet is sometimes referred to as beauty or harmony, balance. Right, in other words, when you achieve a balance of chesed and gevura, that's Tiferet. Chesed associated with Abraham, gevura associated with Yitzchak. Tiferet associated with Jacob, who's also known as Israel, and we are the children of Israel. So today, the third day of the Omer, we meditate on Tiferet sheb'Chesed. So this idea of balance and harmony in our chesed, right? So all week we think about chesed, and now we think about the harmony of chesed. So what could that look like? You have to examine yourself. And what is your own chemistry? What is your own makeup? But if you're a person who is not selfish, who likes other people, likes being kind to other people, likes giving to charity. Okay, so fantastic. Then you already got a well-developed sense of chesed. What would be the tiferet of that? Maybe it's not so good to just give to anybody who asks. Maybe you have to do a little bit more research on the charities that you're going to give to, right? And maybe that's a gevura aspect of chesed. Or maybe you're a person who, is mercurial, and you can be quite kind and generous, but you can also be set off. Okay, I can lose my temper. Earlier today, I try not to yell at other people. I was working there on my computer, doing some website design for a project of ours, and what should have been an hour-long, relatively straightforward thing turned into hours and hours, and I'm sitting there yelling at my computer, "What's wrong with this stupid thing?" And if somebody walked in on me there, it would have been like, yeah, he's not a very balanced person, right? So something that I'm working on is, come on, if I'm giving it all over to God, and God runs the world, and everything that is, given to me and arranged for me, there's a reason for it, and I have emunah, I have faith. Okay, so I shouldn't become angry over minor things like that. Just take a step back. What I can control, I can control. What I can't control, I can't control. I'll get through this moment. Things like that is what we have to self-examine and try to make a healing, a cure, an improvement. This whole 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuos, as we're counting the Omer and working on our attributes, is a time of conscious self-improvement by examining each of our attributes. So day 3, the meditation is Tiferet sheb'Chesed. There are a lot of Omer counters. There's apps. There's a wonderful, I think it's called Omer Counter. Chabad.org has a wonderful Omer counter to help you count each day. And the meditation and a little bit of specific information about what it is we're meditating on that day to help you in this process of growth. So thank you, Chaim in Florida, for challenging me to discuss the Omer today. Okay. Our daf is page 104 here in a tractate Sanhedrin, the 24th volume of the Talmud. And we're still discussing Mishnah number 1 in chapter 11. It is the 24th volume of the Talmud. I feel like I haven't said that in a few days, and now I'm not confident that it's the 24th volume of the Talmud, but I'm pretty sure it is. But at any rate, it's we're continuing our discussion of the world to come, this idea that all Israel has a share in the world to come. That's what the Mishnah said, but there are exceptions, and there are some very wicked kings who lost their share in the world to come, and they were listed right here in this, like Ahaz, King Ahab, and King Menashe, and there was also some commoners who were listed there, but there's also some very wicked kings who were not included in that list, who are perhaps even more wicked than the wicked kings who are specified as having lost their share in the world to come. And we started talking about that yesterday, and we'll continue that. Okay, so, relatively near the top on page 104a, the Gemara asks, and for what reason did the Tannaim, so a Tan is a sage of the period of the Mishnah, and an Amora is a sage of the period of the Gemara. And for what reason did the Tannaim, plural of Tana, not enumerate Ahaz among the kings with no share in the world to come? A very wicked king, but he wasn't listed as a person who lost his share. His wickedness is extensively recounted in the Bible. So Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says he's not enumerated because he is cast between two righteous people, between his father, Yosam, and his son, Chizkiah. Since he had a righteous father and a righteous son, somehow there's enough merit, between his father and his son, that it saved him and got him some kind of a portion in the world to come. Rav Yosef says he is not enumerated because he had a sense of embarrassment from Isaiah the prophet. As it is stated, the Lord said to Isaiah, "Go out now to meet Ahaz, you and Shear Yashub, your son, at the end of the aqueduct of the upper pool in the highway of the launderer's field." Right, so the koves field. What is the meaning of this term koves? There are those who say it means concealed, kavash, as Ahaz concealed dechav shinhu. He concealed his face and passed by the prophet because he was embarrassed to be seen. In other words, Ahaz may have been wicked, an idolater. As a king, he led others to commit the sin of idolatry, but at least he was embarrassed about it. He had a sense of, there's a holiness to shame. Shame is a tricky thing. If you wallow in shame, if you get so sunk into shame, that you begin to hate yourself, and you lose your energy and your drive, and you doubt that you can ever come back from the lows that you have sunk to, the depths that you have sunk to. Well, then shame can be very self-destructive. But the positive aspect of shame is that you can say, "I've done wrong. I'm ashamed properly because I did something wrong. And I need to do something about it. I need to repent," right? As somebody who is shamed of actual wickedness, there's hope that he can repent, right? Shame is that first stage of atonement and repentance and return and building yourself up into something new and more positive. So that's the positive aspect of shame. And Ahaz apparently felt shame when he encountered Isaiah, the prophet, who was utterly righteous. And there are those who say that he placed a launderer's vessel over his head and passed by the prophet so that Isaiah would be unable to identify him. Again, he was ashamed of his wickedness before the prophet. The Gemara continues and asks, for what reason did the Tannaim not enumerate the wicked Amon among the kings with no share in the world to come? Again, same question. He was so wicked. Why did he still have a share in the world to come? Why was not listed among those kings who lost it? And the Gemara answers, he is not enumerated due to the honor of Yoshiahu. Yoshiahu, his son. Yoshiahu, his son. And the Gemara challenges this. Well, then let us also enumerate Menashe due to the honor of Chizkiah, his righteous father. And the Gemara explains the son confers merit upon the father, right? So even a wicked person, if his son is righteous, he did not ruin his son, right? He did not transmit those wicked values to his son. In fact, if his son is righteous, somehow his son rose above that. So the father did not pollute the son. And when we do good in the world, when we do chesed, when we show gevura, when we do righteousness in the world, that is actually a merit for our parents, right? So even if our parents have left this world, if they have passed on, God forbid, then we are still able to add to their merit, which helps them in the world to come when we do righteousness in this world, particularly when we do righteousness in their name, right? So, whenever I donate to charity, if there's a box to fill in, in honor of or in memory of, and, when you support Torah study by donating to accidentaltalmudist.org, donate.accidentaltalmudist.org, we always have that box in memory of, in honor of. And so when you make a donation to charity and do in memory of, I always make it in memory of Babet Basara, my mom's Hebrew name. So then that adds to her merit in the world to come. And then we see the same idea here. The son confers merit upon the father, as it is to the father's credit that he raised a righteous son. But the father does not confer merit upon the son, as it is written, none delivers from my hand. Right? When the son is wicked and the father is righteous, that doesn't help the son that he had a righteous father and the son went wicked. Although there is some sense of God so loved Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that no matter how far astray the Jewish people go, there's some residual love between God, and our patriarchs that helps us along. But it's not merit, right? In fact, when we act wickedly, it embarrasses Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in heaven, right? They can't add to our merit. It's purely out of love for them that God forgives us, for some of the evil that we do when we go astray, right? So the wicked, the merit of the father is not conferred upon the son in the way that the merit of the son is conferred upon the father. Abraham does not deliver, for example, his son Ishmael from the judgment of heaven. Isaac does not deliver his son Esau from judgment. And the Gemara comments, now that you have arrived at this understanding, Ahaz too was not enumerated in the Mishnah due to the honor of his son Chizkiah. And the Gemara asks, and for what reason did the Tannaim not enumerate Yehoiakim among the kings with no share in the world to come? As we discussed yesterday, he was extremely wicked. And this is discussed extensively in the Bible. So the Gemara explains it is due to that which was stated by Rabbi Achia, the son of Rabbi Avuya. As Rabbi Achia, the son of Rabbi Avuya, says, it was written on the skull of Yehoiakim, this and yet another, indicating that he will receive a double punishment. And the Gemara relates, and we saw this story a few weeks ago, that Rabbi Perida's grandfather, who was apparently Rabbi Achia, the son of Rabbi Avuya, found a skull that was cast near the gates of Jerusalem, and on the skull was written, this and yet another. He buried the skull, but it did not stay buried. It emerged from the ground, and he buried it again, and it did not stay buried. Well, then he said to himself, well, this is no doubt the skull of Yehoiakim. As it is written in his regard, he shall be buried with the burial of a donkey, drawn and cast forth beyond the gates of Jerusalem. Jeremiah 22:19. So the fulfillment of this verse is exemplified in the inability to bury him. And Rabbi Perida's grandfather said, he is a king, and it is inappropriate to display contempt for the skull of a king. So he wrapped it in silk and placed it in a box. His wife saw the box and thought this was the skull of his first wife, as he is not forgetting her, and she ignited the oven and incinerated the skull. And when she informed her husband of what she had done, he said, well, this is the meaning of that which is written on the skull, this and yet another. Not only was his corpse discarded in a demeaning manner rather than being buried, but eventually his skull was incinerated, which is the most demeaning thing that can be done to a body, and we do not incinerate, right? We do not cremate. Jews must be buried. So the ordeal atoned for some of his transgressions, and he received a share in the world to come. In this case, he was so wicked that God arranged, perhaps in the merit of his father, to visit extreme punishments upon him, not only in his life, but even after his death, which provided some measure of atonement for him, so that he did go on and have a share in the world to come. It is taught in a baraisa, or perhaps in the merit of his son, not of his father. It is taught in a baraisa, the Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, because of Chizkiah. Now, Chizkiah was righteous, very righteous. He also, like Yoshiyahu, presided as a king over a rebirth and rededication to Torah Judaism in Israel. But nevertheless, he had a boastful statement. He said in 2 Kings 20, verse 3, "And I have done what is good in your eyes." Well, maybe you should say, I hope that I have done what is good in your eyes. I pray that what I have done was good in your eyes. He stated it as a fact, and so here it's being regarded by Shimon ben Elazar as boastful. And he also asked the prophet inappropriately, "What shall be the sign that the Lord shall heal me?" Now, because of his question, "What shall be the sign?" Gentiles ate at his table. The sign was that the sun reversed its path and appeared lower rather than higher on the sundial of Ahaz, leading the king of Bavel to dispatch messengers to Chizkiah. Right? So something good was done, a small miracle was performed for Chizkiah, but he paid a price. First of all, you don't want miracles to be performed for you. We don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we need miracles. And so there was a price to be paid for this. And what was it? In his case, as a king of Israel, he should not have had Gentiles eating at his table. And this ultimately caused the exile of his descendants, according to Shimon ben Elazar. So the Gemara comments, this supports the statement of Chizkiah. As Chizkiah said, anyone who invites an idol worshiper, this is Chizkiah the sage, anyone who invites an idol worshiper into his house and serves him causes the exile of his descendants, as it is stated, "And of your sons who shall issue from you, whom you shall beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the place of the king of Bavel." 2 Kings 20:18. And with regard to the verse, now Chizkiyahu, I have to distinguish between Chizkiah, who was a sage, and Chizkiyahu, who was a king. And Chizkiyahu was glad of them and showed them his treasury, the silver and the gold and the spices and the precious ointment, from Isaiah 39:2. And Rav says, what is the meaning of beis nechoto? It means that his wife, who typically did not appear before strangers for reasons of modesty, poured drinks for them. And Shmuel says it means that he showed them his actual treasury. And Rabbi Yochanan says it means that he showed them a weapon so powerful that it breaks another weapon. Okay, new subject. Apropos the exile of the descendants of the kings of Judea, right? The eventual fall of the southern kingdom and the destruction of the first temple sent, when the wicked emperor Nebuchadnezzar, right, sent his armies and they destroyed the temple, and then the Babylonian exile began. So that was all, and so Jeremiah was the prophet who sadly witnessed that. And he wrote not only the book of Jeremiah, but also Lamentations, right? So that's authored by Jeremiah, the terribly, terribly sad book of Lamentations about the destruction of the first temple and the destruction of Jerusalem. So in Hebrew, that book is called Eicha. Eicha. The word Eicha really just means how. In other words, the first verse of Lamentations is Eicha, Yashva Badat, right? How does the city sit solitary, right? Looking at Jerusalem, which is forlorn, destroyed, and empty because the people have been exiled. So Eicha means how, but it's this expression of, oh, how could this happen, right? So now that we've brought up Eicha, we're going to learn a little bit about Eicha. So with regard to the verse, how does the city sit solitary? The first verse of Lamentations, Rava says that Rabbi Yochanan says, for what reason were the Jewish people stricken and their plight bemoaned with the term Eicha? It is due to the fact that they violated 36 prohibitions punishable with karas, with excision, that are enumerated in the Torah. And this is corresponding to the gematria, the numerical value of the word Eicha, which is spelled Aleph, which is the numerical value 1, Yud, value 10, so that's 11, Chaf, which has the value 20, so we're at 31, and Hey, which is 5, so that adds up to 36. Rabbi Yochanan says, for what reason were the Jewish people stricken and their plight bemoaned with an acrostic based on the Aleph base, the alphabet, as the book of Lamentations contains multiple alphabetical acrostics. In other words, a series of verses where a verse starts with the letter Aleph, and then the next verse starts with the letter base, and then the next with Gimel, and they go in alphabetical order. That's called an acrostic. It is due to the fact that they violated the Torah, which was given in the language of the Aleph base, right? The Torah was given in Hebrew, using the Hebrew alphabet. With regard to the phrase, does the city sit solitary? Rava says that Rabbi Yochanan says that the Holy One, blessed be he, said, so God is speaking and saying, I said, and Israel dwells in safety, the fountain of Jacob in solitude, to a land of grain and wine. Also his heavens shall drop down dew. Deuteronomy 33:28. In other words, when the children of Israel were rescued from slavery in Egypt, given the Torah in the wilderness, and then sent into the promised land, led by Joshua with tremendous assistance from God in heaven, and then we were given the promised land, right? And the promised land, as long as we would just hold true and stand fast by the Torah, we could have lived there indefinitely, in a land of milk and honey, a land where the crops grow beautifully and greatly and fecundly, right? God gave us everything, and still we became ungrateful and turned away and wanted to be like our idolatrous neighbors. It's just so awful. It's so shameful that we have that in our past. So God is now saying, why did we lose it at the time of the destruction of the first temple? God is saying why, right? So indicating that their solitude shall be one of wealth and prominence. Now that they have rejected my directive and cleaved to and learned from the idolaters that surround them, so then their dwelling shall be solitary in sorrow. Right? In other words, the Jewish people were held as a unique people with a unique mission and a unique gift of the promised land. And when they spurned that gift, then they would be unique in their sorrow. Right? In other words, we were given so much, and when we were ungrateful about it, then our punishment would also be so much. Right? The level of suffering would be commensurate with the level of the gift that we had spurned. With regard to the phrase, the city that was full of people, right? So Eicha begins, how it is so solitary. We were solitary in our reward, solitary in our punishment. Now about the city that was full of people. Rava says that Rabbi Yochanan says they would marry a younger female to an older male and an older female to a younger male so that they would have many children. With regard to the phrase describing Jerusalem, she became like a widow. Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, like a widow, but not an actual widow. Rather, Jerusalem is like a woman whose husband has gone to a country overseas, and yet he intends to return to her. So this is actually an expression of great hope, right? Because God is essentially the husband, and Israel is the bride. Right? And so the bride cheated on the husband and went after idolatry. And so the husband, God, would have been justified in giving a get, right? In divorcing the bride and saying, well, Israel, you turn your back on me, bye-bye. But God doesn't do this. God loves us so much that even when we go horribly astray, he will not sever that bond. Rather, he will, let us be alone for a long time. He'll let us fend for ourselves, a sheep in a world of wolves, but he will never break that bond. He will never let us be destroyed utterly, nor will he ever break that bond between God and Israel. So it's like a husband who goes away. Great among the nations and princes among the provinces. Rava says, Rabbi Yochanan says, every place they go, when exiled among the nations, the Jewish people become princes to their masters due to their wisdom. The Jewish people have some unique skills and abilities that has been very helpful to us in all the different exiles, right? All the different places we've been in the diaspora over the millennia. So one thing is that the Jews are always learning, right? They're people of the book, and that wisdom is helpful. The sages taught in a Baraisa, there was an incident involving two Jewish people who were taken prisoner on Mount Carmel, and their captor was walking behind them. Now on page 104b, one of the captives said to the other, the camel that is walking ahead of us is blind in one eye, is blind in one of its eyes, and laden with two wineskins, one filled with wine and one filled with oil. And two people are driving the camel, one a Jew and one a Gentile. So the captor said to them, stiff-necked people, from where do you know these matters that you cannot see? In other words, the people who are, they're walking along the road, and they can't even see this camel that's up ahead, and the party that's walking up ahead of them, but they're able to make these conclusions. It's like these two guys are trackers, right? And they're talking to each other about this, this traveling party that's way up ahead, but out of sight, and saying, well, I can tell from the signs, these attributes about them. And the captor just laughs at them. Who do you think you are that you can know these things about the people walking ahead of us? So these captives, these Jewish captives, said to their non-Jewish captor, well, we know that the camel is blind from the grass that is before it, as from the grass on the side that it sees, it eats, and from the grass on the side that it does not see, it does not eat. In other words, it's only eating on the side where its eye is working, on the side of the road. And we know that that camel is laden with two wineskins, one of which is filled with wine and the other is filled with oil, because wine drips and sinks into the ground, and oil drips and floats on the surface, and we see the difference on the ground. And we know that the two people who are driving the camel, one is a Jew and one is a Gentile, as the Gentile defecates on the road, and the Jew, in the interest of modesty, goes to the sides of the road to defecate. And the captor pursued the camel and its drivers to determine whether the statements of his captives was accurate. And he found that the reality was, in fact, in accordance with their statements. And he came and respectfully kissed them on their head and brought them to their house and prepared a great feast for them. And he was dancing before them, and he said, blessed is he who chose the descendants of Abraham and granted of his wisdom to them. And in every place that they go, they become princes to their lords. And he released them, and they went to their houses in peace. This would be the opposite of a Jew hater. This would be somebody who takes seriously what it says in the Bible, that the Lord blesses those who bless the Jewish people and curses those who curse them. The Gemara returns to its interpretation of verses in Lamentations, Jeremiah's book. In Lamentations 1:2, it says, she cries at night. She cries, bacho tivke. So these two cries, indicated by the use of a compound verb, why are they written? So Rabbah, right, so bacho and tivke, this is actually, it doesn't sound like the same word, but it's the same word, different syntax. This doubling of a verb for emphasis. So why? So Rabbah says that Rabbi Yochanan says one is a cry over the destruction of the first temple, and the other is a cry over the destruction of the second temple, which was destined to be destroyed. And the term at night indicates that the crying is over matters of night, as it is stated with regard to the response of the Jewish people to the report of the spies after their return from the land of Canaan. Right, so in the incident of the spies, when the people said, okay, we're going to enter this promised land, let's get a look at, let's know what we're headed toward. We want to hear a report about it. So God, Moses said, well, should I send spies like the people are asking me to do? And God says, if you want, go ahead. That should have been a good clue. Like, no, we should not send spies. It's a bad idea. But the people were insistent. Moses agreed. They sent 12 spies to check out the land. They were the leaders of the tribes. Two of them were Joshua and Caleb. They were fine. The other 10 came back and said, well, the land's beautiful, but it's occupied by giants whom we'll never defeat. They'll kill us. Now, why would you say such a thing when you're in an encampment where everyone for years is eating manna from heaven, is shielded by the clouds of glory, is drinking water from a miraculous spring, is there because God rescued us with miracles from slavery in Egypt, parted the sea, etc. It was a ridiculous thing to do. But people are so easily panicked and freaked out that everyone freaked out and said, oh, what will we do? It showed a total lack of emunah, of faith. And so God said, okay, well, you people are totally faithless. You will not enter the land. Your children will enter the land. You're going to stay out here in the wilderness for another, for a total of 40 years, and you'll all perish out here, and it will be your children who inherit the land. Right? So this matter, this freaking out of the people upon the report of the returning scouts, the spies, happened at night. And so that's what they're saying here, that the vestige of that sin, and that was on Tisha B'Av, which is the same date in the calendar as when the first temple was destroyed and when the second temple was destroyed, and numerous other calamities in Jewish history. So there's an association with that night. So these are matters of the night. And because it says in that incident of the people, panicking, and all the congregation lifted up their voice, and the people cried that night, from Numbers 14:1. Rabbah says that Rabbi Yochanan says that day that they heard the spies' report was the evening of the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av. The Holy One, blessed be He, said to the Jewish people, you cried an unwarranted cry, and so I will establish for you a reason to cry for generations. Alternatively, the term at night indicates that, with regard to anyone who cries at night, his voice is heard due to the ambient silence. Alternatively, the term at night indicates that in the case of anyone who cries at night, the stars and the constellations cry with him. Alternatively, the term at night indicates that in the case of anyone who cries at night, one who hears his voice is touched by his suffering and cries with him. So there was an incident involving one woman, the neighbor of Rabban Gamliel, and her son died, and she would cry over his death at night. Rabban Gamliel heard her voice and cried with her until his eyelashes fell out. And the next day his students noticed that he had been crying, and they removed the woman from his neighborhood so that Rabban Gamliel could sleep. Apropos of almost nothing, but I was just reminded as I was reading that, I watched the movie Golda with Helen Mirren last night. Really good movie. Really good, solid movie about Golda Meir. And the terror and the wisdom and the fortitude that she had to have during the Yom Kippur War, which was really one of the greatest crises in the history of modern Israel. And there was this moment of her compassion for a mother who lost her son that was very powerful. The movie is shot beautifully. It's a political drama, so it's not an action thriller, right? So it's not so fast paced, but it's really good and worth watching. With regard to the verse, and her tears are on her cheeks, Lamentations 1:2, Rabbah said that Rabbi Yochanan says this is like a woman who cries over the husband of her youth. As it is stated, lament like a virgin girded with sackcloth for the husband of her youth, Joel 1:8. So with regard to the verse, her adversaries have become the head, Lamentations 1:5. Rabbah says that Rabbi Yochanan says this indicates that anyone who torments the Jewish people becomes a leader. As it is stated, for there is no weariness to him that is set against her. At the first, he, meaning God, lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterwards God afflicted her more grievously by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, the Galilee of the nations. So Rava says that Rabbi Yochanan says from this verse, one derives that anyone who harasses Israel does not grow weary. It's terrifying teaching right there, right? So first of all, that somebody who makes a career out of hating Jews and persecuting Jews will rise to prominence. And they won't get tired of it, right? They'll become stronger at it. They won't get tired of being an enemy of the Jews. Sadly, you could see that. I mean, you could see it right now happening on these college campuses, and these demonstrations in cities around the world. These people, and you've seen it throughout time. There are people who just hate the Jews, and they get up on their soapbox to preach about it, and people listen to them, and so they acquire prominence. Now, these people lead themselves, their families, their communities, their nations to destruction. Right? Where are the Romans? Where are the Greeks? Where are the Babylonians? Where are the Nazis? They're all gone from this world, thank God. So it's not a lasting or admirable prominence, but it's a kind that people seek. With regard to the verse, it is nothing to you, all you who pass by. From Lamentations 1:12, Rava says that Rabbi Yochanan says, from here there is a source from the Torah for complaint, i.e., it is appropriate for one to make his suffering public so that others will have compassion for him. Don't isolate when you're suffering. Let people know, and they will show you compassion and help you through that period and pray for you. With regard to the phrase, all you who pass by, Rav Amram says that Rav says that it is as though Jerusalem said, they have rendered me like a city of those who violate the most fundamental precepts of law and morality. As with regard to Sodom, it is written, then the Lord rained upon Sodom brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, from Genesis 19:24. While with regard to Jerusalem, it is written, from above, he has sent fire into my bones, and it prevails against them. Right? So our teaching is, who destroyed Jerusalem at the time of the destruction of the first temple? The armies of Nebuchadnezzar. But really, who destroyed Jerusalem in the first temple? God, who sent his angel Gabriel. Right? So as we were talking earlier about Gevura, right? So Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, archangel, is, when God needs to mete out punishment, he sends this warrior angel, a strong angel, a judging, avenging angel. And so Gabriel was given the mission to tear down and destroy Jerusalem. And so the armies of Nebuchadnezzar were really just a stick in the hand of God's messenger. But here the comparison is being made that, well, in the same way that God destroyed Sodom, right, because they were so utterly wicked, well, if Jerusalem was destroyed, what can we conclude but that the people of Jerusalem had become wicked? Not all of them, but they were held to a much higher standard than the people of Sodom. The people of Sodom, all they needed to do was be decent. Just be decent. They utterly failed that test. People of Jerusalem were expected to be holy. Sadly, they failed that test. Not everyone, of course, but enough. Right, of Sodom it is written, Lord. So in both cities, fire rained down from heaven. And it is written, for the iniquity of the daughter of my people is greater than the sin of Sodom, in Lamentations 4:6. The Gemara asks, and is there partiality in the matter? Why was Jerusalem not overturned like Sodom? I mean, Sodom disappeared from the world, right? It was just sulfurous fire came down and made a nothing of it, right? Basically where the Dead Sea is, that's where Sodom was. Now there's just nothing there, except a Dead Sea. Jerusalem, was destroyed. The walls were torn down. The temple was destroyed, but it was not burned to the ground and turned into an uninhabitable place. So what is the question being asked? So Rava says that Rabbi Yochanan says it is because there was an additional measure of suffering in Jerusalem that was not in Sodom, right? They suffered more than the people of Sodom, and that saved them from being destroyed utterly. As with regard to Sodom, it is written, behold, this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. Pride, surfeit of bread, and careless ease was in her and her daughters, and yet she did not strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy. Ezekiel 16:49. The people of Sodom were not subject to the afflictions of hunger and famine. Right? They were just destroyed while they thought things were going great, and then they were gone. Whereas, with regard to Jerusalem, it is written, the hands of compassionate women cooked their own children. The long siege that preceded the destruction of Jerusalem, there was a lot of suffering for the people in Jerusalem. They didn't repent, but because of that suffering, that suffering sort of brought down the level of overall punishment that was meted out against Jerusalem. The verse, the Lord has spurned all my mighty men in the midst of me, Lamentations 1:15, means that this is like a person who says to another, this coin was invalidated. The prominent residents of Jerusalem were crushed and discredited, and their reputations were irreversibly tainted. And with regard to the verse, they have opened their mouths against you, from Lamentations 2:16. Rava says that Rabbi Yochanan says, for what reason did the prophet precede the verse beginning with the letter Peh to the verse beginning with the letter Ayin in several chapters of Lamentations? Since Peh means mouth and Ayin means eye, it is for the spies who said with their mouths what they did not see with their eyes. In that evil report that led to the people freaking out, the spies said, oh yeah, well, it's a beautiful land that they saw, but it's filled with giants who will destroy us. They didn't see that. They didn't know that. That was just a conclusion that they added, and they should not have done for all the reasons we've talked about. With regard to the verse, the eaters of my people ate bread and they called not upon the Lord, Psalm 14:4, Rava says that Rabbi Yochanan says any Gentile, idolatrous thief who eats the bread of the Jewish people tastes the flavor of bread. And one who does not eat from the bread of the Jewish people does not taste the flavor of bread. So apparently they enjoy only what they steal from the Jewish people. With regard to the people referred to in the phrase, and they call not upon the Lord, Rav says these are the judges who are not God-fearing, and Shmuel says these are school teachers who do not perform their job in the name of God. Incredibly harmful. School teachers are entrusted, with raising children, teaching children to Torah and to cling to God. And when they do it, just to get a salary and don't bring the children closer to God, to Torah, to the tradition, they do incredible harm. New subject. The Gemara resumes its discussion of the kings and commoners enumerated here in Mishna number 1 in chapter 11, who have no share in the world to come. We completed our digression on Lamentations. Back to our Mishnah. The Gemara asks, who enumerated these kings who have no share in the world to come? Rav Ashi says the members of the great assembly enumerated them. Rav Yehuda says that Rav says they sought to enumerate one more, King Solomon, in the list of kings with no share in the world to come. The image of the face of his father, King David, came and prostrated itself before them, pleading to omit Solomon from the list, and they paid it no heed. A fire came from heaven, and the fire scorched their benches, and they paid it no heed. Why would they put Solomon in this list of such wicked kings that they have no share in the world to come? Solomon, who built the first temple. Solomon, who wrote Proverbs. Solomon, who wrote Koheles, known in English as Ecclesiastes. Solomon, the wisest person who ever lived. Why would they say he has no share in the world to come? Because, as we've discussed, late in his reign, when he had so many wives, and the Torah said, a king shall not multiply wives, and he did, way too many wives, and many of them were idolaters, and they built idolatrous temples in Jerusalem, and Solomon is blamed for that. So later, these people, the men of the Great Assembly, who are enumerating which kings had no share in the world to come, because Solomon was at such a high level of holiness, and then he fell, right? Again, it's like God is very strict with people who have the ability to operate at the highest levels of holiness, right? So Solomon didn't have to do as much wickedness as those kings who were utterly and only wicked. But Solomon, even though he had so much righteousness to him, when he fell and allowed, idolatry in Jerusalem, it did tremendous harm. Even more, we see that his son was just a useless scoundrel who, as soon as he started his reign, the kingdom split in two, and all the horrors and devastation that came from that. So these men of the Great Assembly said, well, we should include Solomon in this list of kings who have no place in the world to come, right? So then, David, the spirit of King David said, what are you doing? You're not going to keep my son. You're not going to even put him on a list of kings who have no place in the world to come. And they didn't listen to him. And then a heavenly voice, right? God sending a voice from heaven saying, no, Solomon doesn't belong on that list. And they're to listen to the heavenly voice. Similar to the story of the oven of Achnai, which we've done, and that's too long a story to discuss today. But they didn't listen to the heavenly voice. They paid it no heed. So, a divine voice, right? Not just a bas kol, but it is a bas kol. So a heavenly voice emerged and said to the members of the Great Assembly, quoting Solomon, Proverbs 22:29, do you see a man diligent in his business? He shall stand before kings. He shall stand not before obscure men. Diligent in business here means somebody who is honest and hard-working. See the greatness of Solomon, who preceded construction of my house to the construction of his house. Right? So God is saying Solomon has a tremendous merit. Why? Because he built the first temple. And he built the first temple before he built his own palace. Moreover, my house he built quickly in just 7 years, and his house he constructed in 13 years. In other words, the palace was not bigger than the temple, so Solomon applied, more work and resources to getting the temple built than he did to his own palace. Therefore, he shall stand before kings, he shall stand not before obscure men, and it is inappropriate for you to enumerate him among the wicked. And they paid no heed to the heavenly voice. So the heavenly voice emerged again and said, citing Job 34:33, shall his, meaning God's, shall his recompense be as you will it? For you loathe it, so that you must choose and not I. Therefore speak what you know. Right? In other words, now the divine voice is getting frustrated with this men of the Great Assembly and saying to them, what the heck are you guys talking about? I'm talking on behalf of God. I'm the divine voice from heaven. You're not going to condemn Solomon. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know everything that he did that was righteous that I know about, God, know about. I'm telling you, he's got a place in the world to come. Enough of your nonsense. And so, Solomon, of course, was not included among the kings who have no share in the world to come. And the Gemara adds, those who interpret the Torah metaphorically, right, who go a little bit deeper into the Torah verses and draw out some more metaphorical meanings, they would say, all those enumerated who have no share ultimately do enter the world to come. Right? So there were 7 people mentioned in our Mishnah, 3 wicked kings and 4 wicked commoners, who it says they don't have a share in the world to come. But now those who interpret the Torah metaphorically say, well, actually they do. Now, this should actually not surprise us because we saw that story, that very famous story of King Menashe appearing to one of the sages, right, more than 1,000 years after Menashe lived, and saying to him in a dream, hey, if you had lived in my time, you would have run, not walked, to pursue idolatry right along with us. And taught him something about where to cut a challah, right? When you make a blessing over challah, where you should cut into it. So the idea is that was actually the spirit of Menashe appearing to, I think it was Rav Ashi. So if that's the case, Menashe had some kind of portion in the afterlife. Maybe he's suffering in Gehenna. Maybe he spent a long time in Gehenna before he left. maybe his portion in the world to come is tiny and very humble, but apparently he didn't disappear, right? So that's not mentioned here, but I'm bringing that up as we read this. So according to these who interpret Torah metaphorically, all of those enumerated who have no share ultimately do enter the world to come. As it is stated, Gilead is mine and Menashe is mine. And Ephraim also is the strength of my head. Judah is my scepter. Moab is my washing pot. Over Edom I will cast my shoe. Philistia, cry aloud because of me. From Psalm 60 verses 9 and 10. And also Psalm 108, 9 and 10. So now we break down those verses into phrases. Gilead is mine and Menashe is mine. This is referring to Ahab, who fell in Ramoth Gilead. Menashe, in its plain meaning, is referring to King Menashe. Ephraim also is the strength of my head. This is referring to Yerovam, the one who created, split the promised land in two, so that there was a southern kingdom of Judea and the northern kingdom, which he appointed himself king over. Initially, because he's very idealistic. He's going to save the people from a wicked king Rehoboam. But of course, he became corrupted and an idolater who led the nation into idolatry. This is referring to Yerovam, who comes from the tribe of Ephraim. Judah is my scepter. This is referring to Achisophel, who comes from the tribe of Judah, one of the commoners mentioned in our Mishnah. Moab is my washing pot. This is referring to Gehazi, who was afflicted with leprosy over matters of washing as he took money from Naaman, who he instructed to immerse in the Jordan River. Over Edom I will cast my shoe. This is referring to Doeg, the Edomite. Philistia, cry aloud because of me. This is referring to the fact that the ministering angel said before the Holy One, blessed be he, Master of the universe, if David, who killed the Philistine and bequeathed the city of Gath to your sons, will come and complain that you gave a share in the world to come to his enemies, Doeg and Achisophel, what will you do concerning him? Will you accept his complaint? And God said to the ministering angels, it is upon me to render David and his enemies friends with each other, and even David will agree. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, get them in now. With regard to the phrase, why is the people of Jerusalem slid back in perpetual backsliding? Right? Jeremiah asking, what is wrong with these people that they keep backsliding away from a good, close relationship with God and God's Torah? And Rav says the congregation of Israel answered with a convincing response to the prophet. The prophet said to the Jewish people, repent, as your ancestors sinned. And where are they? Right? They've been destroyed. They're dead. They're gone. Well, they said to the prophets, and you prophets they said to the prophet, to Jeremiah, well, your prophets who were righteous people and who did not sin, where are they? They're also dead. As it is stated, your fathers, where are they? And the prophets, they do not live forever, from Zechariah 1:5. So the prophet said, so now Jeremiah answers the Jewish people, well, your ancestors reconsidered and conceded that the admonitions of the prophets were fulfilled, as it is stated, by my words and my statutes, God speaking, which I commanded my servants the prophets, did they not overtake your fathers? And they repented, and they said, as the Lord of hosts intended to do to us, according to our ways and according to our doings, so he has dealt with us. Zechariah 1:6. In other words, the people who were warned by a prophet, didn't listen, and then the harsh punishments came, and then the people said, we should have listened to the prophet. So now these people who are challenging Jeremiah that, well, why should we listen to you? It's not going to do us any good. He's like, no, it will do you good to listen to me. Sadly, he was not able to convince them. Shmuel says that this was the convincing answer. 10 people came and sat before the prophet Ezekiel, and he said to them, repent, right? Come back to God, come back to Torah. They said to Ezekiel, in the case of a slave sold by his owner to another master, or a woman divorced by her husband, does this person have any claim upon that person? Well, since God gave the Jewish people to other masters, the ties that existed between him and us were severed. Right? If God sent the nation into the Babylonian exile, or if God sent the 10 kingdoms, the 10 tribes of northern Israel into the Assyrian exile, well, then it must be that God divorced the Jewish people. So why should the Jewish people come back to God? God has no claim on them. This is the argument being made before Ezekiel. And what does Ezekiel say? The Holy One, blessed be he, said to the prophet, to Ezekiel, go say to them, where is your mother's scroll of severance with which I sent her away? Or to which of my creditors have I sold you? For your iniquities you sold yourselves, and for your transgressions was your mother sent away. From Isaiah 50 verse 1. Learn from this that God did not sever his ties to the Jewish people. So even if Jewish people sever their own ties to God, God will never consider those bonds broken, and you can always come back. And that is what Reish Lakish says. What is the meaning of that which is written, David my slave in 2 Samuel 3:18, and Nebuchadnezzar my slave in Jeremiah 43:10? How can the wicked Nebuchadnezzar be depicted by this term, a slave of God, or a servant of God, in the same manner that David was described? So rather, it is revealed and known before the one who spoke and the world came into being that the Jewish people are destined to say that God sold them to the nations and they no longer have ties to him. Right? The Jewish people will make this claim. Therefore, the Holy One, blessed be he, preemptively called Nebuchadnezzar his slave. And with regard to the law concerning a slave who acquires property, the property belongs to whom? And the property belongs to whom? The slave belongs to whom? And the property belongs to whom? They both belong to the master. So in other words, the Jewish people sold themselves to a slave of God, well, then they remain owned by God. With regard to the verse, and what comes into your mind shall never come to be that you say, we will be like the nations, like the families of the countries, to serve wood and stone. As I live, says the Lord God, surely with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm and with wrath poured out will I rule over you. Ezekiel chapter 20. And Rav Nachman says, let the merciful one become wrathful at us with all that wrath and redeem us. Right? Better God should be angry with us and punish us than turn away from us. With regard to the verse, and chastise in judgment, his God will instruct him, Isaiah 28:26. Rabba Bar Chana says that the prophet said to the Jewish people, repent. And they said to him, we cannot, since the evil inclination dominates us. That's why we keep straying from God. And he said to them, so chastise your inclinations. And they said to him, his God will instruct him, i.e., God should instruct the evil inclination to allow us to overcome him, as we are incapable of doing so on our own. Right, we're incapable of doing it on our own. But God does rule over the evil inclination. So if you ask God to help you overcome your own evil inclination, that is a kind of help that is a prayer that will always be answered. Right? If you ask God to help you overcome your own evil inclination, you will be stronger. It won't happen overnight. It won't happen instantly. But if you ask God for help in overcoming your own evil inclination, God will help you do that. Questions. Eicha, in the story about the oven, the sages made the point that they were given judgment over how to interpret the laws. With Solomon, however, they didn't have the right to judge souls. Very good, Eicha. Very, very good distinction, right? In terms of when the heavenly voice allowed the sages to say, okay, we say that this oven, which Rabbi Eliezer says is kosher, we say it's not kosher. God is ultimately not going to interfere with that, right? And we follow the majority of the elders in any generation. But with regard to judging whether a soul will enter heaven or not, that's not the place of not the sages, not the men of the great assembly, not a king or a high priest or a judge or a rabbi or anybody. Only God decides that. Beautiful, Eicha, beautiful. Bill, I like that. I'm preaching on Friday. I almost wish I'd had this dot beforehand. We sell ourselves into the misery of our sins. God is constantly trying to get us to let him free us. And I say almost only because I feel pretty confident in what I've got. God willing, you will find it satisfactory. And Norm Simpson, final comment. Does anyone think about the fact that everyone on the face of the earth comes directly from Noah's family? What does that mean? That means that we are all obligated in the Noahide commandments, the 7 commandments. That's why everyone has a role to play in the Torah, whether Jewish or not Jewish, right? Jews are bound by the 613 commandments that Jews are obligated in, but all human beings are obligated in the Noahide commandments, which begins with know about God, right? Do not commit idolatry, do not murder, do not steal, do not engage in prohibited sexual practices, do not tear a limb from a living animal, which includes cruelty to animals, don't do that. And finally, establish courts of law. All human beings are obligated to create a system of justice that is consistent and rooted in the eternal values that God put into the world through the Torah. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Thursday, at the regular Thursday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a terrific night.